Hey, my name is John Santaferraro, and this is the Digital Analyst, where AI makes sense and digital dominance begins.
The Digital Analyst with John Santaferraro, powered by Insight Jam.
One of the most surprising turns in the AI marketplace is that the cost is being driven down. OpenAI spent more than $50 million to train their models. DeepSeek AI claims they spent $5 million. And now Fei-Fei Li and others from the University of Washington and Seattle's Allen Institute for AI and the Stanford University spent approximately $50 in compute to train their models. That's $50 million to $5 million to $50. So what is next? There's a continual trend toward lowering the cost of AI. There's been a lot of talk around generative AI, agentic AI, responsible AI, explainable AI, sustainable AI. The next buzzword might just be affordable AI. But let's not hold our breaths. While most of the focus has been on large language models, LLMs represent a very small subset of AI. There are still significant investments to be made as we move towards a time when AI agents are capable of reasoning, learning, and adapting. In addition, there's the cost of taking an existing model and applying it to a specific business within an application, among an ecosystem of applications, devices, people, machines, and other AI. So there still is for enterprises the entire expense of software engineering to embed AI in their applications. To help us make sense of this, our guest today is Hyoun Park. Hyoun is the CEO and Principal Analyst at Amalgam Insights, the industry analyst firm he founded in 2017. He covers AI, analytics, data management, technology expense management, and cloud FinOps. His experience as an industry analyst goes all the way back to 2009. So grab a glass of wine or a cup of coffee and join me on my Tuscan farm in the hills between Lucca and Florence for the Digital Analyst. Let's give a big digital welcome to Hyoun Park. Hyoun, welcome to the Digital Analyst.
Hi. Oh, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
I've been looking forward to this. You know, we have been watching this crazy AI world explode and expand over the last couple of years, and we've heard about everything, right? We've heard about generative AI, agentic AI, responsible AI, explainable AI, you name it, and the entire time the cost remained high, and now there seems to be a new trend toward affordable AI. What exactly is driving down the cost of AI, especially Gen AI?
Yeah, I think to figure that out, first you have to look at what has been happening over the past several years. So obviously, before about 3 years ago, when we were talking about AI, a lot of times we were talking about some extremely complex and difficult to conceptualize technologies that would power things like Google search engine or some powerful machine that ended up beating Ken Jennings on Jeopardy. That we knew that there was some immense brain box back there, but we didn't know how it worked. We didn't know how to make it work for us. We just knew that it cost millions and millions of dollars to actually put into place. And this whole idea of actually using AI was just impossible for us to even do as normal human beings. But when we saw ChatGPT 3, that really made a big difference. It was the first time that most of us, the rest of us, like George Costanza might have said on Seinfeld, were able to actually access AI. And the reason that this model ended up working is that it dumped tens of billions of parameters, maybe hundreds of billions of parameters. And in that process, the model and the model ended up learning grammar. It ended up learning semantics. It ended up learning semiotics, all these different ways that language worked for us in ways that mimicked human speech, but didn't require prior programming. And so the lesson learned at that point was if you throw millions and millions of dollars and billions of parameters into a model and pour every single way that words have ever been used with each other, we are going to create some sort of logic that is human usable. Now, let's fast forward a couple years to today, and all of a sudden we're seeing people say, well, I don't have $8 billion to throw at a model. Do I have any other way to create something better? So there's a lot of innovative things that I'm sure we're going to talk about, going from the way that models are built to how they're simplified, to how they're structured, to how they're supported, that are leading to this new era of affordable AI, where we're actually able to finally make models and use models and access models that don't cost 17 million arms and legs to start building or to support.
You pointed this out to me that earlier this week, that there was if you look at OpenAI, over $50 million to train their large language model. And then DeepSeek shows up on the scene and they claim that they spent $5 million. And now I'm going to let you talk about it because I don't want to be the under. So what's going on with Stanford and University of Washington? And
yeah, so and that $50 million, that's just for the latest model. OpenAI has literally raised billions of dollars, mostly to support training for the various types of models that they have. Because OpenAI, they also have things like DALL-E for on the photo side, and they have all these different types of models that are doing constant research on. But yes, moving to Stanford and University of Washington, they announced just the other day that they created a smart deep reasoning model, and they were able to train it for $50. And the reason they were able to do this is that they were building on existing open source foundation models that are out there. So they were pulling models from Google as well as Alibaba Qwen from China. And, these are models that are openly available. So you can host them on your own computer. You don't have to worry about whether American rules or Chinese rules or whatever are in place from a hosting or governance perspective. So they're using these open source models, and they figured out by basically asking the right questions, like 1,000 questions that are pretty deep and getting deep outputs, and fine-tuning existing foundation models. You could simplify those models, and you could make those models very aligned to specific use cases, and then have this smart reasoning model that basically does what you need it to do for a much smaller price, and it's a much smaller model as well than these gigantic foundation models that are being created by the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic. So we're starting to see the game change from building bigger and bigger and bigger models to starting to say, maybe these foundation models that we have in place are actually big enough because they have such an immense corpus of human knowledge already that our next step is actually extracting what we need from those models to create our own better, cheaper, faster models.
I did take a look at a couple of things of what, this project at Stanford, and the $50 that they're talking about is $50 of compute.
Yes.
So that doesn't include, personnel that were working on it, any other costs that were involved. That was pure compute. And the other thing, it's not clear to me that there was actually any reasoning going on. I mean, this still is a language model, I think, that they're working on. And so it would be, John Thompson corrected me, just made it really clear to me in a conversation I had with him that it's inference, right? It's
Yes.
it's not reasoning.
Yes. When in AI right now, we're hearing a lot of talk about deep reasoning models, and usually what is meant by that from a practical perspective is both that these models are taking a bit longer to think about their answers. It's funny, you can actually ask these models to wait or think longer, and they will take a little more time to process the answer before giving you something. So they are spending a little bit more time actually providing detailed answers and digging deeper into the model itself from a response perspective. And then also being able to link multiple processes or queries or prompts together to create, call it the semblance of reasoning. It is a multi-step processing workflow, however you want to call it. The idea is that you can change tracks to some extent. You can change direction based on new context that comes in the middle of analyzing the question. And whether we want to call that reasoning or multi-step thought or processing, we're still trying to figure out what the right colloquial language is for combining, kind of using whether it's there's a bunch of different approaches being used here, but sometimes it's a mixture of experts where you have different aspects of the model that are working in conjunction with each other, or sometimes you have actual different interruptions happening within a workflow. There are all these different things like computational tasks that we are trying to translate into human language in a way that resonates with your average person.
The other thing in my conversation with John Thompson, the other thing that came up is he mentioned this idea that don't assume, for the listeners out there, don't assume that your cost is $50. Right.
Like this is just,
especially.
Yes. The $50 is just compute. For starters, that Stanford team is led by Fei Li. So she's an absolute superstar in the AI world. Her time alone costs much more than $50.
Yes.
And I believe they had a team of about 10 researchers. So obviously these are all top tier PhD, academics working on this model. So, that's the real cost from a training perspective. And then when you're actually putting this into production, you've got to think about inference, context, and then you've got to take care of the infrastructure going forward. And this has actually been a problem because, for instance, you mentioned DeepSeek earlier. DeepSeek was last month's superstar model, coming in at $5 million or so to create a reasoning model that competed well with ChatGPT. But now they are seeing the challenges associated with their success because their servers and their infrastructure are being overloaded. So now people are having trouble accessing DeepSeek, not for governance reasons, not because it's hosted in China, but simply because their computers can't keep up. And there's an inherent advantage to any solution or any vendor that has the pure data center compute power to keep up with usage. That's a real issue in today's AI world.
I'd add on top of that, there's the whole software engineering effort that's got to take place, because if you're an enterprise, you need to put all of that language model and that AI into an application within your organization. So everything that you normally do with software engineering still needs to be done to get that operational within you. So you could be talking even $50,000 to $100,000, depending on the company, of the work that you need to do in terms of product design, in terms of architecture, not just product architecture, but the platform architecture and the security architecture. Not to mention then the actual development of the application that houses the AI, the operational considerations that need to be there, the governance. So I do think that there are things that are driving down the cost of AI, and the costs are plummeting compared to where we started. But as an enterprise, you can't forget the rest of what needs to be done to put that into an application.
That's right. At the end of the day, AI, at least from my IT perspective, is another application. at its most fundamental level. Like as cool as AI is for many use cases, for especially for summarizing and for automation capabilities, at the end of the day, it has to be treated as another application, no more, no less, from a support perspective.
Want more Insight Jam? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for shorts, panels, podcasts, and more. In your shorts feed, enjoy a daily dose of best practices from tech experts and leading solution providers, while long-form panel discussions and keynotes, recorded live every quarter, go deep on important industry topics. And don't miss our collection of regular podcasts, keeping you informed on the latest trends. We're hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so subscribe to be notified of our next upload. Now, let's get back to the show.
So I'm curious what you think too. What is going to be the impact of lower cost? It seems like we're going to continue to see additional technological advancements that will lower the cost of AI, especially the language models. So how will the lower cost of Gen AI and AI reshape the market? What kinds of things are going to fall out of this cost reduction?
It's hard to tell. So I find it interesting that on the one hand, you have companies like OpenAI, led by Sam Altman, of course, that have a very vested interest in saying that the more money you spend in AI, the better that AI gets. It's definitely a function. It's just like you'd see in calculus. It's like they're on that curve. There's some sort of definite relationship curve there. That's the story that they have to sell. But when I look at AI models, the foundation models are all already 100 billion, 200 billion, 300 billion parameters. And just thinking about something like the English language. English language has 600,000 words. Most people don't use more than 25,000. And there's only so many connections and relationships and definitions that you can have that are relevant to your job. And if you use 25,000 words, it's not like a million parameters or not, but is it 10 million? Is it 100 million? Maybe a billion. It's probably not 10 billion or 100 billion. So there's just a limit to the amount of data that is relevant to human conversation or job roles or the things that we typically use AI for. And so I think there's going to be a real switch in mindset from building the next big model to building the most relevant model. And now it's become much easier to build those more relevant models. And I think that's also important because as models get smaller, it becomes easier to host them locally. So a 1 billion parameter model typically takes about 4 gigs of RAM, which is very accessible on an end user device. Amazingly, you can do that on your phones, tablets, PCs at this point. But once it becomes a 10 billion parameter model, 40 gigs is a lot for a personal device, and that may change or not over time. But just getting that to that single digit billion parameter model, I think is going to be an interesting shift in AI, because then we can do a lot more things around personalization and roles and aligning models to a lot of the apps and OS tech things that we do at a personal level.
I think it's going to be interesting as well to see how it impacts the edge, right? And the Internet of Things with devices, machines, because it seems like as these models become specialized and you can do them at a much smaller scale and a smaller cost, then those models proliferate, and you are going to have intelligence, not just by connectivity, but more intelligence built into an appliance, for example, a refrigerator, whatever appliance you happen to be using. So I think that I think it changes the whole model of accessibility. Gen AI did this, right? Gen AI and ChatGPT, when it exploded, I never had conversations with my family about any kind of advanced analytics and the work that I do And suddenly everybody wanted to talk to me about artificial intelligence, and everybody wanted to say, "Oh, you know AI?" And I was like, "No. I'm not a data scientist. I understand the market. I understand what could be done with it, but I never had those conversations before." So I feel like there's going to be a similar kind of thing that happens that makes AI accessible in many different ways, not just a Chat GPT or a Anthropic or Claude or Gemini.
Yeah, and I agree that when GPT came out, that was definitely a moment for the public. My mom was asking me how this works, and my mom never asks me anything about my work because it's mostly inscrutable to her as a graphic designer. But when your mom starts asking you about stuff, and your job is analytics and IT management, you know that your world has reached the mainstream, at least for that one shining moment.
Yeah. The other thing that is a curiosity to me is it seems like the lower cost and combination of open source, lower cost is going to change barrier to entry for some companies that have been around for the last couple of years. And they've made these investments, and suddenly I can show up with another brand new company today and in a fairly short period of time catch up to that person. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about this. I don't know, how are these companies going to create barriers to entry and real value in their IP?
Yeah, for the past couple of years, the cost of training and building foundation models has been treated as an unscalable moat, and we are quickly seeing that's no longer true. And it's kind of this paradox that we do need to spend probably billions of dollars to get to the next level of AI complexity. But the reality is that where we are now is probably good enough for the types of use cases that we're looking at. So when we work with generative AI at this point, we type in a question or a prompt and we get an answer. And honestly, the answer is usually good enough. And if it's not factual, we have tools such as retrieval augmented generation, where we can access a third-party data source and ask it to do the actual factual query for the fact that we are looking for. And then it can bring that back into the workflow of generative AI and provide that answer to us with grammatically correct language of choice. We have tools to make up for the fact that generative AI itself is not designed to be a factual and deterministic system. But I think that the next step is trying to figure out how to put that all together, that we still need to ground our models in fact, which takes additional work. And then models need to be tuned and improved over time, because just like any software, any model that stays static and does not change over time will become more inaccurate as the world changes. That's just the nature of any sort of processing. We do it with our own brains. We do it with all sorts of other workflows. If you were in robotic process automation with the likes of Automation Anywhere or UiPath, those workflows had to be updated all the time as well to reflect that your business processes changed. So as your business logic changes, your models have to change as well. And that's increasingly going to be a more important part of AI, I think, than whether you have GPT 4.0 or 5.0 or 6.0 over time. I think that part is kind of incremental at this point. But we're also seeing shifts in terms of looking at what we're calling agentic AI, and we're seeing more integration of AI into other applications, all different ways of using AI that are going to make us more productive in a cost-effective way.
It seems like this plummeting of cost around generative AI. It seems like it will impact the world of AI agents as well. As the costs are driven down with the large language models and even in the ability to deploy generative AI. Suddenly, there's an AI agents also become easier to build, faster to build. There's an impact there as well, and I think we'll see the acceleration now of agentic AI because of what's happening with Gen AI. It seems like there's a direct link. They're obviously they're different technologies as far as I'm concerned, but there's a close link.
Yeah, there's a virtuous cycle going on here because generative AI makes it easier to turn natural language into some sort of code, basic functionality. And then you can use that basic functionality to create the workflows that get things done. And right now, the biggest challenge is trying to figure out what is exactly happening when we are asking these agent creators or these low-code agent builders to create workflows or logic, sometimes generative AI logic, to get work done. And I feel like 2025 is really going to be a year where companies test that out, because generative AI can't be tested exactly the same way as a rules-based workflow. You have to kind of get an idea of what prompting and what data will lead to specific outcomes, and kind of test that out in a broader portfolio sense rather than specific rules-based scenario sense. It requires a little bit more sandbox testing, I would say. So instead of saying I have these 10 scenarios, you might have to ask it 100 or 1,000 questions and see what the responses are to make sure you're truly ready for production grade agent use. And so I think that's a bit of a shift in thinking of a more probabilistic system that can shift answers based on a 1 or 2 word tweak that you might have to your request, because that's different from what we've traditionally seen from more traditional natural language queries or the more Boolean type searches and queries that we're used to doing.
Part of that shift is going to be around the production of synthetic data as well, because if you talk about asking 1,000 questions, and that is probably true for for the business processes that don't involve risk, but where there is risk involved, and that risk is high because of high transactions or high transaction value, suddenly you probably are going to have to create synthetic data and simulated worlds that, like they've done with self-driving cars, right? I mean, in order to put a car on the street, they had to create every world imaginable and put the car into the world, because there wasn't enough data anywhere to be able to simulate all of that. They had to create the simulations. So when you're talking high risk or high transaction, then somebody's got to create that data as well. So this move to agentic is not as easy as just kind of stitching together RPA and workflow capabilities and bringing up the level to hyper intelligent automation. I think it does require some, I don't even know what to call that engineering. I don't have a word for it. I haven't heard people really talking about it other than in the world of self-driving or self-driving cars, which by the way, I've talked about. I stopped talking about self-driving cars. What they've done is they've created an AI agent driver for the car. That's agentic AI.
Yeah.
So anyway, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, like when you see your Tesla come to you in the parking lot, that's an agent taking over for that last a few feet of driving in that very particular structured environment. Like that's the type of thing that we're talking about. And I think one of the things that makes this different is that the agent creators that are currently coming out from the likes of Salesforce, ServiceNow, IBM, etc., they're all natural language based. So literally you're having line of business workers write something like, please qualify all of my leads in a way that makes sense. And then the agent does the rest of the work. And I think being able to word it that way requires a little bit more testing. So going back to the synthetic data, you might take that question, qualify my leads. Can you qualify all of my leads? And then you use the synthetic approach to figure out what are 500 ways to ask this question that are all different. And then you go back into the model and you test all 500 of those to make sure that all of them come back with a similar approach and that they don't go off into the wild blue yonder and suddenly start spouting gibberish or shifting into another language, I'm Korean. So, if, you write your question in English and suddenly shift to Korean, it's fine for me, but not fine for most people.
Yeah, it becomes in multilingual situations, it becomes even more important. And it's really interesting because even before Gen AI, I know that there was a lot of work being done in multilingual systems to be able to not just translation, but translation not just of words but of concepts.
Yeah, like in generative AI, for those models, there are no different languages. It's all just one language of tokens to them, and it doesn't care whether for it, hello and annyeonghaseyo or whatever, ciao, or all these things are all the same thing. It's just each one of these is just one token to that model, and there's no real logic. There's nothing that really separates them. So it's going to choose the most appropriate token for the particular prompt that you have, and then that kind of and there's unexpected logic that happens in a lot of these models simply because they're so large.
Unlock better leads through Solutions Review events.
Welcome to Data Demo Day. Expert Roundtable, Solution Spotlight featuring Monte Carlo, Cohesity, Denodo, Cloudflare, High Gear, Broadcom, Next Thing.
Boost your brand with a webinar that shares comprehensive use cases, real-time product demos, and an interactive Q&A. All broadcast live to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Zoom from our Boston studio, or even on location. Fill your sales funnel with high-quality targeted leads. And contact us today by visiting solutionsreview.com/virtual events.
So it kind of brings up another topic too, and that is around orchestration, agent orchestration, which it seems to me we're really early when it comes to orchestration. When what's coming out of Salesforce, ServiceNow, very focused on their application, even though they're talking about a bigger world. Most of what they're doing is focused in a very closed world, not an open world. But we're gradually moving to a point where a lot of these task-based agents, right, that do a very specific thing, are being knit together to be able to do more complex types of work instead of just booking a flight for me, plan an entire vacation, right, and do it in a way that is fully aware of who I am and what I prefer. And equally considering my wife and everything that she wants and she prefers. Now go plan a vacation.
Right.
So, but to start stitching these together, and that's a sort of a consumer-based kind of thing. Every business and business ecosystem has those kinds of complexities in it, whether it's supply chain, marketing, and sales motions, whether it's investments, funds, finance. It's like these are complex ecosystems.
Yes,
that require many different agents to work together. And so I haven't seen anybody really figure out how to orchestrate a band of tasks, and which eventually become personas, role-based kinds of agents. I haven't seen anybody put together a platform to orchestrate all of that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm starting to see hints of agent orchestration from the companies we talked about before, as well as Boomi. There's small startups like Tray that are looking at orchestration kind of from an iPaaS integration platform as a service perspective, and bringing together two or more agents. It's possible to do. They're starting to look at kind of workflow-like approaches, kind of linking things together as we used to as we've linked together analytic processes and workflows and things like Alteryx, and taking that type of approach. But I agree that the big picture of agent orchestration hasn't really come together fully, especially when you think about a third-party agent orchestrator that can bring all of your agents together on an enterprise level and figure out problems like this vacation thing that you talked about. So, that would be like, you'd have your flight agent figuring out how to get you to, say, Monaco. And then while you're in Monaco, you're going to need a separate agent to figure out probably the restaurants you want to go to, or the museums you want to go to, or what have you. And then you're probably going to need a separate agent to figure out things like your transportation within Monaco. All these things that are going to have to work together and have the right type of memory to stay consistent without throwing the next agent completely off kilter. That is definitely still a bit of a work in progress, because it is going to be a challenge. But I think that because we have a common sense way of defining some of these language-based tasks, that we can get there. It's just a matter of being able to test the inputs and the language that are being used, and to make that work at a kind of semantic level.
I do think we will see some breakthroughs in 2025, because things are moving fast enough that I think we will see more complex AI agent orchestration platforms emerge. I'm pretty hopeful around the application integration space, because in some ways an AI agent is just another application. It seems like a logical place. The thing that is a little bit more complex to me is just the way that agents communicate with each other and with devices and with applications. There are some very specialized things and considerations that need to be taken seriously. The handshake. How do you determine if one agent can work with another agent? When that handshake is made, how do they establish a common objective based on the two objectives that they've been giving? Because every agent by nature has limitations. It's been limited in terms of what it can and cannot do, and what it's striving to do ultimately, and the subtasks that get to the ultimate objective. So when you have two very complex applications like that, and they're going to merge now and kind of work on my behalf or on a company's behalf, I don't see those capabilities in the application integration vendor space, but it seems like something that they might be a likely place to develop those kinds of things.
Yes, and traditionally we've thought about these connections as being APIs, but one of the interesting, I feel, angles around generative AI is that we've been teaching computers to talk and think a little bit more like humans. And when humans talk to each other, it is not an API. It is a conversation meant to bring mutual understanding to each other. And I think that part is going to have to be synchronized to some degree. You're going to have to create some windows of conversation. You're going to have to figure out how to keep these agents from getting into doom loops of conversation that could spin out of control, while maintaining the right level of attention and memory to the tasks at hand, and then understanding when some new input or new capability that throws everything off kilter might actually be relevant to the situation. So back to the vacation example we're talking about, you plan this whole vacation out, and then it rains. Raining completely changes every other part of the plan, and you have to have agents being able to take that input and then being able to adjust appropriately without perhaps going overboard and making bad decisions or bad suggestions.
I just don't want two of my agents falling in love with each other and deciding that their agenda is more important than mine suddenly, and they just plan whatever the heck they want to plan because they think it's a good idea. So we'll talk about governance. That's a whole. We could probably talk about governance for at least 45 minutes by itself. That'll be a future topic. But I'm curious, where do you think all this is going? What maybe not too far ahead, but 2025. Anything else you see kind of coming together this year that we've either discussed or haven't discussed? Where's it all going?
Yeah. So I think 2025 is really a very important year for agentic testing. And I am hoping that this is leading to a future where we've talked a lot in the data world about systems of record and your golden record and the one source of truth. But the reality is there is no one source of truth that is for everybody in a large enterprise. Every employee in an enterprise has their own aspect of the truth, and then there's kind of this shared aspect of truth that people have to keep in mind working with each other. And I'm hoping that agentic work helps people to better understand which aspects of the truth are specific to their role and which are shared across the organization, because we're going to be accessing and asking for information in our own particular ways. And I think that could lead to a better understanding of how data queries are working, how work is defined, and how to better align our work to each other. One of the things that I've always felt is a little bit missing in data is understanding how to get like-minded people to work together within an organization, and being able to better track how people are building agents and asking for information and asking for work to be done might be interesting from an employee engagement and employee performance perspective. So I'm hoping that we're able to start tying data and work and people together in a more effective way through this agentic approach at a very high level. But it all starts with understanding how these agents really work and how the agents start working together, and then how we can work with the agents working together.
Oh, I love it. I love it. There is that people element that is not just the insertion of a person into the process, but it is the actual person. And it's the psychographics that go with all of the demographics of that person in an environment like work where you work together. I have to confess that I was playing with ChatGPT last week, and I asked it a question. I said, I am ENFP and my wife is ESTJ. Can you give me 10 recommendations on things that I can do to help improve my relationship with her? And the 10 suggestions that came back were right on. It was 10 things that, and I know what it did. It has knowledge of Myers-Briggs, which it's an older personality trait thing, but I happen to still like it. And it gave me the 10 things. And so you could actually, even as a manager, you can have a profile on your people and say that here's my team and the roles that they play. Will you recommend what is the best way for me to provide leadership to the group and to each person as an individual? What are the motivators that I should be considering for my team? So I think there is already today, without even having to wait for the future, tremendous potential for leadership, for management, and you can do it with any of these personality tests, right? The Strength Finder or Enneagram, whichever one you happen to like, but that data is all out there and fed into these LLMs already. I think it's a great opportunity area.
Yeah. So of course there are issues of privacy and legality, but in theory you could have, at least for the enterprise LLMs and agents, you could have a background agent looking at the business specific conversations and seeing how do people tend to use this, and then being able to tie things together and make some connections based on that activity. Of course, you can't get too invasive just on principle. Delve in the details. But I think there's opportunities to tie people together, not just from a skills perspective, but from kind of an emotional or a kind of a thought-based perspective, a personality-based perspective.
Well, Hyoun, thank you so much for joining the Digital Analyst. It's been a great discussion. Thank you for all the insight that you have shared for our listeners. It was rich, and I look forward to doing this again. We'll find another time. I'm sure we could talk for another 5 hours. Thank you so much for joining the Digital Analyst.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining the Digital Analyst podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard today, just take a look down below, like and subscribe to the InsightJam.com YouTube channel. You can also find more information there, tons of other videos, more than 400 videos, in fact. I think you'll enjoy it. Just about every aspect of IT, technology, artificial intelligence, analytics, you name it, it's there. If you want to connect with me, find me on LinkedIn. That's the best way. Send me a note. Let's have a conversation. You can find out more about Ferraro Consulting at ferraroconsulting.com. If you want to contact Hyoun, it's amalgaminsights.com, but I happen to know him well. And again, best place to connect, LinkedIn. You'll find him there. He'll dialogue with you. Great insight. Thank you for joining the Digital Analyst.
Powered by Insight Jam.